Welcome back to Old School Sports and our franchise hockey Manager 9 playthrough of the Chicago Blackhawks. If you're enjoying the series, would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to our channel and have any comments on what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. Please post them down below. Always like to get feedback from viewers. We have recently completed the 2029 to 2030 regular season, and the Blackhawks for the second straight year are President's Trophy winners with 109 points. Last year, we were unceremoniously bounced in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. The hope is that will be more effective this year. We don't have a totally easy matchup, given that we've got the best record in hockey. We're facing a divisional rival, the Arizona Coyotes, who we were only 2-2 against this year, despite our really good 50-23-9 record on the season. Taking a look at the roster as we try to get ready for this playoff series and hopefully a long playoff run that will result in a Stanley Cup. The young defenseman Xavier Veilleux still banged up. Not really banged up, just sick with nausea day to day. But he's only at 80% fitness, so he's going to be a healthy scratch for us. The other healthy scratches, at least for the first game of the series, the left wing youngster Mathis Dubé and the right winger Frank Nazar. We do have an important player who should be coming off of the injury list shortly, Quinton Byfield, who is our first-line center when he's healthy. Has been injured for quite some time, since the end of February, with a lacerated spleen, but he's day-to-day at this point, so the hope is that we will get him back relatively soon. That would allow us to move Dylan Larkin down to the second line, Cole Sillinger down to the third line, and then Nathan Villeneuve down to the fourth line as our center, and get our top line back together with Kent Johnson, Quinton Byfield, and Mitch Marner. Wallstedt is in goal for us today, and it's time to get this 2030 Stanley Cup playoff pursuit off to a start. And unfortunately, a rough start to the series for the Blackhawks. We're already in a 1-0 hole to the Coyotes, despite playing that first game at home. They jumped out to a 1-0 lead, scored a couple more goals in the second, and then 3 on us in the third to really bust things open on us. We did get a goal from Larkin to cut the deficit to 2-1 in the second, but we were down 3-1 headed into the third. Marner made it 3-2, but then 3 straight goals by McKenna, pair of goals by McKenna, and then Bernier. And that was the margin. I guess the only positive thing is that Larkin and Marner, who are likely to need to be two of our top producers offensively, did both get goals in the first game, but certainly facing 38 shots and allowing 6 of them is not the type of goaltending by Mr. Wallstedt that's going to result in a long playoff run for these Blackhawks. And as we get ready for Game 2, Veilleux is back. Byfield is practicing with the team, but still not ready. That absence definitely could potentially be very costly for us if we can't get him back and healthy when we need him to be. We're going to move Veilleux back into the lineup. Question is who we're going to send to the bench. And I think it's likely to be probably Kevin Korchinski. He had kind of the weakest year out of any of our defensemen. So I think Veilleux goes back into the lineup. Dubé and Nazar are still going to be scratched, at least for this game, although can see we didn't have a lot of great games from anybody here to get the playoffs started, particularly Wallstedt with his 53 game rating. Hopefully we can turn things around today, home against Arizona, before we head out to the desert for games 3 and 4 of this series. And unfortunately, looks like we may have an even quicker exit from the playoffs than we did a year ago. Lost 5-4 at home in Game 2 of the series. You can see they jumped out to a 2-0 lead. We rallied to score it with 3 goals in the third period, but then lost in a second overtime. Got a goal from Cotter in the second, and then down 4-1 with about 12 minutes to go in the game. Sillinger, Marner, and Veyu back in the lineup get the goals to get us tied, but in overtime to Braden Yeager, his third goal of the series already in just 2 games. Puts them ahead. It was a power play goal after a penalty by the young defenseman Roy Chung on our end. So it is looking like a potentially devastating playoff result ahead of us for the Blackhawks after a great regular season. Wallstedt was much better today. Faced 59 shots, saved 54 of them. On the ice close to 95 minutes. So clearly the defense is not carrying its end of the bargain at this point, and it doesn't seem that Byfield is going to be back right away as we head out to Arizona. So the Blackhawks' backs are almost up against the wall here, just 2 games into the 2030 playoffs. And we are going to keep our lines and lineups the same here for Game 3. See what happens. Really need to get a victory. And we do finally. A 4-2 win here. Looks like we did bounce back from an early deficit. Byfield getting close to being healthy enough to play, but not sure if we'll have him in Game 4. Arizona did jump out to a 2-0 lead on us, but you can see Larkin had a couple of goals, Shields with a goal and an assist. Second period, Shields and Cotter, and then in the third period, Larkin, the veteran, with a couple of goals, assists from Marner, Johnson, Rinzel, and Cotter. So we are still certainly the underdogs in this series, but at least feel like we are close to digging ourselves out of that big deficit that we let ourselves into. Going to basically, I think, stick with the same lines and the same lineup. Rinzel and Larkin are not fully fit. Either is Marner, but I don't think we can afford to take particularly Marner or Larkin out of the lineup here. Would be great if we can get this one and go back home all tied up 2-2. Unfortunately, we're going back home down 3-1, and now our backs are proverbially against the wall. Kent Johnson going to miss about 5 days, so we get Byfield back, and then one of his line mates, our big free agent acquisition from this past off season, is done probably for the rest of this series. The hope is that we can string 3 wins in a row together, but we're definitely in a tough spot right now. And we'll certainly bring Byfield back onto the active roster with him being healthy. That should help us. Again, the loss of Johnson. Certainly not ideal. We are going to actually send Nazar down to the AHL. He's a player who conceivably we could be moving on from after this season. Not that he needs to go through waivers in the playoffs, but just has not developed the way that we would have hoped he would over the many years that we've been running the Blackhawks here, and as you may have seen, going to be making over $2 million for each of the next 2 seasons after this year, given that he's having a tough time getting dressed for us more often than not. Maybe somebody that we look to move on from this offseason and replace with a younger and less expensive player. But right now we're going to turn our attention to getting our lineup set. Certainly Byfield will be back in. Johnson will be a scratch. And then likely we'll also scratch either Vesley or Villeneuve to get another left winger, Dubé, into the lineup. So we've got some decisions to make before Game 5 at home in the Old School Sports Arena against Arizona. And as we get ready for Game 5 and a 3 must-win game in a row situation in a best-case scenario for the Blackhawks, down 3-1 in this first-round series, definitely have had to shuffle the lines a little bit. Byfield and Marner back together, but with the injury to Kent Johnson, Bocage, who was also a free agent acquisition this offseason, is going to be our top left winger. Keep Cotter, Larkin, and Shields now together at the second line. They've been playing together most of the year. And we'll see if we can find some magic here. We're going to keep Svedabak. We don't want Svedabak in goal. That was a default move that we don't like. We're gonna stick with our starter, Wallstedt. He's had an excellent year for us, even though for some reason the AI always wants to use Svedabak. We're going to go with the guy who we've been going with most of the season. May end up regretting that decision, but we're loyal, if nothing else. And a 3-0 win, so certainly got a good goalie performance, undoubtedly, in a 3-0 victory out of Wallstedt. He earns the first star with 27 saves in the shutout, goal and an assist for Larkin, and an assist for Cotter. Got all 3 of our goals in the second period. Luchanko, who we picked up off the waiver wire several months back. Quinn Hughes finding the back of the net in, I guess, his second game back with us. Or that was his first game back with us, if I had any memory. And Dylan Larkin, the veteran, with his 5th goal of this series. He has still been very productive for us. Would assume that Kent Johnson, we've got no chance of him for Game 6. I guess we're holding out a little hope. He might be around in Game 7, but I'm guessing he will not be fully ready to go. Probably still at 80% fitness, even if he's available for a potential Game 7. We did end up shaking things up a little bit. Villeneuve ended up getting benched for Dubé to ensure that we had kind of enough players who are proficient at each of the forward positions with the injury to Johnson. Seems like this lineup worked fine in our previous game, so we are not going to change anything. Good news that Wallstedt looks like he may be heating up a bit after that shutout. We've still got to win 2 in a row, including this one, Game 6 on the road at Arizona. Can our Blackhawks get it done? And no. So 2 consecutive President's Trophy victories in the regular season for the Chicago Blackhawks, followed by 2 extremely disappointing playoff performances. As I mentioned earlier, we lost in the second round to Dallas in an epic 7-game series last season. This year, even worse, losing 6-2 as the number 1 seed to a divisional rival here in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs. So very disappointing. You can see dropped down 2-0. Got a goal from the defenseman Hughes and the defenseman Rinzel. So a 3-2 deficit heading into the third. And then they opened up 4-2. Larkin with his 6th goal of the playoffs got us within a goal. And then Dylan Guenther finished off the hat trick with 2 goals in the third to put things away. So incredibly disappointing performance in the playoffs by this Blackhawks team. We've felt like we've built a win-now team, and we've won a lot of games in the regular season, but have certainly been very disappointed in the performance in the playoffs. Now is, unfortunately, we have to start pivoting our attention to thinking about next season. And there's going to be some holes to fill on this win-now team. Korchinski and Dubé, a couple guys who we recently talked about that were marginal players to be in the starting lineup. Both potential free agents. Sillinger, who is an important center for us, also a potential free agent. And then the veteran Mitch Marner, our captain also headed to free agency. So we're going to have a lot of difficult decisions to make as the offseason approaches with all of those players and others. Certainly would think that the lineup is going to look different next year than it looked this year, but a bit frustrating that after 2 straight excellent regular seasons, we've had 2 consecutive far too early departures from the Stanley Cup playoffs. And as we start thinking about next season, mention that Marner and Sillinger, who are 2 of our top paid offensive players, both potential free agents, Dubé, who we also talked about, as well as Kevin Korchinski, are the players that we don't have signed. And you look at our salary obligations, we've only got about $10 million available to fill those holes on the team. So certainly unlikely that we're going to be able to sign all 4 of them before they hit free agency, and extremely unlikely that all 4 of them will be back. Right now, one of our big decisions as we turn to planning for next season is going to be to figure out what to do with each of those players. But before we start planning in earnest for the offseason, we'll take a look back at our top and bottom performers from this year. Victor Eklund, the only guy on the IL right now. He's been out basically since the beginning of the calendar year. Left winger, 23-year-old player who had a great year for us a year ago with 31 goals and 48 assists. Did kind of move down to the 3rd line from the 2nd line and the 1st line where he was occasionally playing last season when we had some injuries due to the new additions that we brought to the team, most notably Johnson and Bocage when he was healthy. But was not incredibly productive this year for us, just 5 goals and 14 assists in 40 games. But think that he is still a young player that we will be building around for years to come. So looking forward to him recovering from that torn elbow ligament and hopefully being 100% and the player that he's been in the past when we get into training camp later in the summer. And thinking about our goaltending, as I mentioned, Wallstedt was our starter most of the year, and he won 37 of the 50 games that we won. 282 goals against average, 910 save percentage, 37, 18, and 4 record. So certainly a fine season for the veteran goalie who will be back with us next year. And Sveta as his backup was better this year, at least in terms of his 1-loss record than a year ago, 13, 5, and 2. Although his goals against did climb significantly to 3, and his save percentage did drop to .903. So I feel like we're still in a good position in goal with the 2 Swedes, but certainly game 1 of the playoffs in particular was a disappointment. But with a 4-2 loss in the series, certainly not something that we can pin entirely on the goaltenders. Taking a look at our skaters and how they all produced, the captain, Marner, is obviously our huge decision this offseason. Was 3rd on the team with 29 goals, led the team with 46 assists and 75 points, and a plus 36 plus minus. So he has still been incredibly productive for us. The issue is just how much money it's going to take to bring him back. And you can see he's looking for over $9 million a year. So we essentially, if we decide to bring Marner back, that's basically using up all of the cash we have and pretty much guaranteeing that even if we do decide to move on from a few other players like Nazar, that we're basically replacing those last few spots on the roster for the other departing players with youngsters likely making the minimum. It might be the right decision. Would love to hear thoughts from viewers in the comments down below as to whether they'd consider bringing Marner back. As I mentioned, he is our captain, but he is also turning 33 in a week, and he's certainly on the downside of his career. Does kind of maintain a harmonious locker room. We're in great shape there. Our job security we thought was really good, but the season objective was a championship. And when we move on to the next day, that first round upset in the playoffs against the Coyotes is going to certainly result in a pretty significant drop in fan happiness for us. So we'll see what happens. Maybe we won't even have a job when the season is over. And some of the things we're worrying about are things that we won't need to worry about, because it's definitely a disappointing season by any measure. So Kent Johnson, who was our big free agent acquisition last year, unfortunately missed the last couple games of the playoffs with that injury. Did lead the team with 37 goals, second with 73 points. Certainly an important player that we're going to be building around for years to come. Dylan Larkin, second straight healthy season for him after a few years where he was missing a lot of games. 31 goals, 35 assists. We've got him signed for another couple years. He's similar to Larkin in that he's a player in his early 30s, heading into his mid-30s, that is on the decline, but feel like he is still a pretty productive offensive player for us, particularly when everyone is healthy and we can play him as our second-line center rather than our first-line center. Will Shields, the young right winger, an important player for us going forward, 17 goals, 41 assists on the year. Cole Sillinger, another one of those potential free agents, and 22 goals and 33 assists, not as productive as Marner. Obviously, he was playing more as a third or fourth line guy than a first line player like Marner. But Sillinger is looking for about $6.5 million a year, so he'll be he is 6 years younger than Marner, and he's looking for $2.5 to $3 million less a year. There's no way that we can bring them both back. That's really practical. So ultimately, it's going to come down to a decision, I think, between the younger and less dynamic Sillinger, or the older but more expensive and likely starting to deteriorate Marner as the one player among our two big offensive guys we could bring back. Paul Cotter, the veteran left winger, typically played on the second line with Larkin and Shields. Nice productive year for him, 20 goals, 35 assists. Defenseman Quinn Hughes, 42 points, including 17 goals. Quinton Byfield, unfortunately, in the year that we were trying to move him up to the first line, he joined us as a free agent last offseason, and he was our second-line center last year behind Larkin when Larkin had an incredible 46-goal season. Byfield was penciled in and penned in as our first line center this year, but you can see he only played 47 games for us due to some injuries, including that lacerated spleen. Was reasonably productive when we had him out there. He will certainly be paired up on the top line next year with Kent Johnson as his left winger. I think the big question is whether Marner, Will Shields, or someone who's not on the team right now ends up being the right winger on that top pairing. Luke Coughlin, the young defenseman, good solid year. Can't complain about a guy who puts up a plus 24 plus minus for us. Matthias Lafreniere, free agent acquisition from last offseason, was reasonably productive as a third or fourth line winger for us. Adam Jecko, youngster who kind of took over as a fourth liner typically. Roy Chung, another rookie like Jecko, Played 51 games for us, was plus 19. Think that he could play an even bigger role for us next year if we do end up moving on from Kevin Korchinski. A couple other young defensemen, Matteo Rotundi, plus 28 on the year, Xavier Veilleux, plus 32 as a rookie with 9 goals. Glad to have both of them coming back, as well as Sam Rinzel. Kind of a down year for Rinzel. He's been a pretty productive offensive player for us since he came up. Did still get 9 goals this year, but you can see he scored 16 and 18 his first 2 years with the team, and his plus-minus dropped from 23 a year ago to plus 10 this year. Hopefully we'll get more from him next season. Bocage, player we picked up in free agency last year, as we talked about, unfortunately got hurt during preseason and missed a good chunk of the year. One positive thing is when he was coming back from his injury, looked like his potential ratings had really kind of tanked, and it seems like he has bounced back a little bit from that. So the hope is that he can still be a productive winger for us going forward. Nathan Villeneuve has kind of moved into a position where he's a fourth-line guy for us. You can see a couple years ago he had 27 goals, 29 assists when the team was not as deep, and he was getting a lot more ice time, but he's kind of become a third or more often fourth-line center for us with the depth we've had at that position. Did score 16 goals, but was not an incredible facilitator with just 11 assists. Mathis Dubé, another guy that we may need to move on for, third or fourth line left winger for us most of the year, and he is looking for over $4 million a year for 5 years. There is certainly an option to bring him back either on his own or with Sillinger. Certainly would not have the option to bring him back with Mitch Marner. And Kevin Korchinski, the last of those free agents that I talked about, was only +1 on the year. Played 72 games, but towards the end of the season, he did kind of fall out of favor a bit with us. And he's looking for over $5 million a year, given that our other 6 defensemen are generally young, not all young. We'll check in on the defensemen shortly after I just finish highlighting the last couple of players. But with the number that he's looking for and the fact that I do like our other 6 defensemen, I love it when I can have 7 really good NHL defensemen, which I feel like we had this past year. But we may just be getting into a numbers game where we can't afford to bring Korchinski back. Tomas Vesely, rookie center, ended up being pretty productive for us. He was -2, but did have 24 points, including 10 goals in 43 games. Jet Luchanko, as we talked about, we picked up from Carolina off the waiver wire, 8 points in 14 games for us. So we definitely have some options with the team that we've built here. Thinking about the defensemen, though, and potentially moving on from Korchinski, Chung, 23, Rinzel is 25, Veilleux and Rotundi both 24, and Coughlin 25. So although Korchinski is relatively young, we've got 5 other guys who are basically his age or younger, and then the veteran Quinn Hughes, who's been moved up in recent years to wear the second A for us. So feel like we do definitely have 6 really good professional defensemen. In a perfect world, we'd like to have the 7th back with Korchinski. Just don't know if as a numbers game it's going to work. So if you have thoughts on what we should do with these 4 pending free agents, the defenseman Korchinski, and then the forwards Dubé, Sillinger, and Marner, would love to hear them down below. We don't have to bring any of them back, and we could just head into the off season with $10+ million to spend. Other option is to bring only Marner back, and then the final option would be to bring back out of Korchinski, Dubé, Sillinger, just one of them, or we could likely swing any combination of two of them if we wanted to bring back multiple players. But I don't think bringing back more than two of these players is realistic. But I would like to think about who we want to potentially sign before they hit free agency, and whether it makes sense for us to go down that path of locking them up before allowing any of them to get onto the open market. So after taking a look at the team, thinking about what we might need to do before we hit the off season, it's time to kind of sim through the rest of the playoffs and find out who the Stanley Cup champions are. Haven't even noticed whether Montreal won their series yet. They did take out the Sabres 4-0, so there is a chance that we will have a repeat Stanley Cup champion this year. And we've moved on to the next round of the playoffs, and the Coyotes, who took us out as a 4 seed, look like they might be a juggernaut. They took out Minnesota 4-1, so it's going to be Anaheim and Arizona in the Western Conference Finals, and the Capitals and the Red Wings in the Eastern Conference Finals. And it's going to be the Anaheim Ducks and the Detroit Red Wings in the Stanley Cup Finals. The Ducks finally ended the Coyotes' magical run 4-1, and the Red Wings took out the Caps 4-2. We do have a few players who are playing hockey at this point in the World Championship. Looks like Sweden, Finland, Canada, and Slovakia, 4 of the teams that remain. And for our part, we've got both of the Swedish goalies, and then Kent Johnson and Mitch Marner are representing us on the Canadian team that is still playing in the World Championships. And Kent Johnson did end up getting banged up, strained back muscle, so out for 4 weeks, but will not impact his availability for training camp. Canada did end up going on to win the World Championship 5-1 over the Czech Republic in the finals. And while it's been over a month since the Blackhawks were on the ice, our jerseys remain very popular. Jesper Wallstedt, the goaltender, the second most popular selling jersey for the month of May, and Marner, Hughes, Byfield, Larkin, and Kent Johnson all in the top 10. So even though the Blackhawks disappointed on the ice in the playoffs this year, we're still selling a lot of jerseys. So the financial situation of the team is probably still in pretty good shape, for whatever that's worth. And the Anaheim Ducks are your 2029-2030 Stanley Cup playoff champions. Took out the Canucks, the Stars, and the Coyotes. And then after falling down 2-0 with losses in Detroit, won 4 games in a row to claim the Stanley Cup Finals 4-2 against the Detroit Red Wings. So congratulations to the Anaheim Ducks on getting the job done here in 2030. And with that, we will call it an episode, a disappointing episode from my perspective, in that the Blackhawks didn't even win a single playoff series. Checking in, we mentioned this a while back. Job security, lost in the playoff round, being upset. Definitely had an impact on fan happiness. Job security has certainly taken a hit with the disappointing playoff performance, particularly with the objective being a championship. Don't think we'll lose our job at the end of the year, but you never know about these things. Locker room's still in good shape, so the big decisions now are over the next 3 weeks until the end of the financial season. is what, if anything, we should do with Korchinski, Dubé, Sillinger, and Marner. Just check in on what they're looking for. Doubt the numbers have changed much. Korchinski actually looking for close to $6 million now. Interested in opinions on him and anybody else. My inclination is likely to move on. Marner, a little less than $9 million. Gonna be a player we could bring back. We could fit it in. I just don't know if a little less than $9 million for Marner versus about $6.5 million for Sillinger. Not sure if we should spend the extra $2.5 million on a player who's 6 years older and is 33 at this point. And then Mathis Dubé is the last guy to consider. Still looking for a little bit over $4 million. So those are the 4 decisions I'm going to make officially over the next week the next 3 weeks in our next episode, when we find out who the award winners are, make some decisions on whether we need to bring any of these guys back before they potentially hit free agency, and then flip over to the new league year on July 1st. And kind of start preparing for the draft and preparing for free agency. I guess we can take a quick look at potential free agents at this point. Obviously, that could still change depending on whether anybody signs players like we are considering doing with the likes of Marner. But does look like some pretty interesting players potentially out there. Isaac Rosen was a guy we had looked at in the trade market. He was on the trade block, as you can see. Seems like Montreal may not get him signed. He would certainly be a younger right winger than Mitch Marner. I'm guessing he's going to be looking for pretty similar money, coming off of a great year with 43 goals and 42 assists. But that could be, if he does hit free agency, maybe a more prudent use of around $9 million, potentially giving it to a player like Rosen, who's younger. Jack Hughes also going to hit the market. Matthew Tkachuk. So some big-time players going to be out there potentially. Obviously, this can change over the next 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, till we do get to July 1st. But it does seem like there will potentially be some talent out there. So the big decision for the Blackhawks is, do we re-sign any of our pending free agents before that market opens? Or do we go in with as much money as possible and perhaps try to add some higher-end talent to this roster? And as I've mentioned, if you have thoughts on what we should do, would appreciate them down in the comments below. And we will review those comments and then come back in a couple days with our next episode and let you know what we decided to do based on what we're thinking and your feedback. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.